Today we're going to talk about developing effective and ethical leadership through human capital and student advocacy. This is based on the 3 key readings, Chapter 3 of Breakthrough Principles by Ravines et al. 2016, the Texas Principal Standards, and the case study Denying Special Education to Students in Need by David DeMatthews and David Knight from 2019. These 3 readings emphasize 4 key points. Then those key points are that effective principals must develop teacher capacity in teaching and learning. They need to use assessment data strategically and to drive instructional decisions. They need to make ethical decisions and legal decisions, even when faced with accountability and district pressures. And they should advocate and work for equitable outcomes for all students. So when we delve into Chapter 3 of Ravines et al., we're focusing specifically on Toolkit 3.9, which talks about assessing student progress and assessment practices. So under assessing student practice or assessing student progress, you get some key reflective questions, and these are a few that discuss: how are students assessed? How often are they assessed? Are the assessments aligned to the TEKS? Do we assess students on common criteria? And then how are data used to improve instruction? Overall, when you read Chapter 3 of Ravines et al., they highly emphasize that instructional leaders should create systems that improve teacher practice based on evidence and data, and argue that data should drive decisions rather than being solely used as a performance measure. In my future practice, I think it's key that I ensure that teachers use both formative and summative assessments to monitor learning, using those formative assessments to monitor and adjust, and summative to see whether or not we are achieving mastery on TEKS. It is important that I establish systems for monitoring assessment frequency and consistency and alignment to standards. It's also important that as a leader that we work with teachers, particularly myself, to ensure that assessments are aligned to essential outcomes and TEKS, and promote using a system of common criteria for evaluating student progress. One of the ways to do that is to be in PLCs, so I would use PLCs to analyze the data and also show what the implications of data are. It's also important as a future principal that I lead by example and use data to make determinations and changes on campus to ensure that all stakeholders, teachers and students, are successful. When you look at Toolkit 3.9, you're talking about interim assessments, and we get a few guiding questions for that, where it talks about: are the assessments available? Are they administered regularly? And do they extend beyond math and ELA? This connects to our Texas Principal Standards because effective principals in the Standard 2 of Human Capital use assessment data not only to understand student learning needs, but to also identify areas of strength and areas of growth for teachers. So as a future principal, I will ensure common interim assessments are developed before the school year begins based on check marks as to where students should be. Schedule assessment cycles throughout the year. Make sure that those assessments are spread across all content areas, not just math and ELA, and use those assessments to identify trends and to guide reflective conversations, but also to determine professional learning needs and identify areas where we can grow in our practice. Delving deeper into the Texas Principal Standards, particularly with Standard 2, effective principals based on the Texas Education Agency recruit and retain high-quality teachers. They develop staff capacity in teaching and learning, and they build collaborative relationships and teams focused on student learning and achievement. This connects to Ravines in Chapter 3 because Principals are responsible for developing teacher assessment literacy. Principals are also responsible for training teachers how to analyze and interpret data. And it's the responsibility of a principal to support teachers and PLCs in making data-driven instructional decisions. Overall, I want teachers in my future practice to view data as a vital tool. This tool can drive improvement and growth, and to not look at data as accountability measure alone. In my as a role as a future leader, my role will be to create those systems and understanding that allow for teachers to grow in their practice and student learning, and to build that culture of collaboration and understanding about the role of data in education. In Texas Principal Standard 3, we're talking about executive leadership. Executive leadership requires that leaders lead ethically, they have integrity, accountability, and are student focused, and that they are making decisions that do not harm children. As a future leader, I will make decisions based on student needs. I will ensure compliance with legal requirements. I will advocate for my students and teachers, and ultimately maintain transparency and accountability. Texas Principal Standard 3 really connects well with the DeMatthews and Knight case study. In this case study, we see that there were accountability pressures that led to some districts and schools denying and delaying special education services to students based on the TEA's performance-based monitoring analysis system, indicator 10. Overall, this case highlights that some leaders face pressures to keep special education numbers low despite the ethical and legal concerns. This connects to TPES standards 2 and 3. In the case study for human capital, the teachers lacked understanding of the IDEA laws, what RTI was and what it was not, and how to properly identify and assess special education services for students. Overall, this demonstrates that there was professional learning that was needed to solve that issue. Under Standard 3, executive leadership, we see that district leaders were pressuring Ms. Martinez to keep numbers low despite legal and ethical issues associating with that, particularly federal IDEA laws. Community members and other advocates were aware of the issues and began to advocate for changes. And ultimately, Ms. Martinez was put into the position of having to balance district pressure and her legal and ethical duty to advocate for her students and ensure that their needs were met. So, in looking at the DeMatthews and Knight case, my key takeaways were that leadership ultimately requires courage. Principals have an ethical responsibility to ensure that their students are receiving the services and supports that are necessary to succeed. We need to ensure that all students are being given those opportunities for success, and making sure that we are providing equitable opportunities. We have a legal responsibility to ensure that IDEA laws and mandates are being met, and that the students that are most at risk, particularly in this case, students from family members with undocumented status and ELLs, were the most overlooked, and that we always remember that accountability measures should never outweigh the legal and ethical duties that we have to our students. So, in conclusion, these readings demonstrate that successful principals use data to make decisions and improve student outcomes, that they invest time and energy in being instructional leaders, coming out from behind the desk and ensuring that they are building teacher capacity, that they engage in collaboration and coaching with teachers, and also go to professional learning for themselves so that they don't become stagnated and are able to grow in their own practice. Ultimately, successful principals lead ethically and legally despite pressures from outside forces, even though it takes courage, and they advocate for equitable learning opportunities for all students. In my future practice, my ultimate goal is to create a school culture where students and teachers can grow, can achieve, and that every decision is guided by our ethical and legal responsibilities to do what is right for our students. My sources are the DeMatthews case study, the Desravines book, Breakthrough Principles, and the Texas Principal Standards.